So my name is Adriana Dominguez. I'm an assistant professor and director of the theater programs with UTEP. And just to give you a little bit of context about what the Dean Speaker Series is, we started in the spring. We are definitely looking into representation in the performing arts. And we're kind of lucky in this weird COVID world that we get to connect with even more amazing artists. And so the format that we're going to have today is our speaker is going to talk for about 40-ish minutes. And then we want to definitely make sure that we have 20 minutes for question and answers. If you want to put them into the chat or if you want to wait until that moment, that's fine. For those of you that are comfortable putting your video on, just so our speaker doesn't talk into the void, that's fine. But if you're not comfortable, I totally get it. Sometimes we get zoomed out. So I'm going to hand it over to our guests so they can introduce themselves and talk about their journey as an artist, a little bit about representation in the performing arts, and then we'll go for a question and answer. So welcome, Mindy. We are so happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Adriana. Thank you, UTEP, for having me. I'm very honored to be a part of this speaker series today. So just a little bit about myself. I see a lot of familiar faces, which is great. I'm originally from El Paso. I grew up here. I started in theater at the JCC, at the Jewish Community Center. I was always a performer, and I had a pre-kindergarten teacher who really just saw it in me and put me on stage, and my love of theater started then. So I have been pursuing theater since a very young age. I was a part of Kids and Company for many, many years. It's where I learned some of my first trades. I learned how to sew there. I learned how to use a glue gun there, and things that have kept with me my whole life. So Kids and Company was really the first company I was ever a part of. And then as soon as I could, I started auditioning for the UTEP Dinner Theater, and I did multiple productions with them. But my family is not from El Paso, and it's kind of hard in a city where there's generations of families to kind of not be one of those families. So unfortunately, I didn't have the roots in El Paso like a lot of other people did. And so I knew that I wanted to expand my world in that way, and I always wanted to go to New York. So I went to UTEP for a year. I had a wonderful year where I did 7 productions in 2007. The 1 year that I was at UTEP, I just went as strong as I could. I did as much as I could. And then I decided to go to an acting conservatory in New York. I went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, which is actually the oldest acting conservatory in the country. And it is a beautiful home. It's a wonderful place that teaches all different kinds of styles. So we learned everything from Meisner acting technique to Stella Adler. We learned movement, we learned voice and speech. It was a very comprehensive conservatory, and I loved that because basically what I was able to do was take that training and decide what works for me and what didn't work for me, and then kind of make my own technique. And as soon as I graduated, I started auditioning. And I just hit the ground running in New York. And I was doing a few things here and there, but as many people know, it's not an easy profession to pursue. It's not easy to be rejected a lot, but that is something that comes with auditioning, and it's a really important thing to get used to, unfortunately, and to continue pushing ourselves forward. And so I actually started having like a love affair with auditioning. I decided it's something I have to do, and if I can learn from every audition, then it's like I'm getting more schooling. So I changed my perspective of what auditioning was, and I learned to fall in love with it. And it's something that I hold on to today, that every audition is like going to an acting class or going to take a workshop, because there's so much opportunity to learn and grow when you audition. So I was doing that for a while, and I wasn't getting too far, to be quite honest. There's a lot of competition within myself and within the theater world, and so I started getting a little down, which happens to every performer. I had a wonderful teacher talk about how performance and life in art, in any art field, is a spiral. You're constantly either going down or you're going up, but there's always a spiral happening. So there's a lot of times in your life as an artist, even within its own process, where you feel like you're down, but you can know that you're always going to go back up. So I was at this point in my life where I just really wasn't sure what I was going to do. I had this love for performance, but I wasn't finding my direction. And this is when something really life-changing happened to me. My partner was working at the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center at the time and had just experienced her first National Puppetry Conference. And she came to visit, and I had started getting into puppetry. I had a Whatnot puppet, which for anybody who is unfamiliar with that style of puppet, it's basically Muppet style. The Whatnot was a company in FAO Schwartz that created Muppet style for people at home. So it's hand and rod, it's you know, moving mouth like this, and then you've got the arm rods. And I didn't feel particularly connected to this style of puppetry, but I decided, you know what, I have this puppet, I should start learning and teaching myself. And so that's what I would do. On my days off or after work or before work, I was playing with this puppet. So fast forward, my partner comes to visit me, and she has just experienced the National Puppetry Conference. And I'm just playing around. I'm really just improvising and having fun. And she said to me, she goes, "You're good at that. I think we need to get you trained in it." And so here's an example of when somebody loves you and sees a talent in you that can help to flourish and make it grow. So the next year, I applied for the conference and I was accepted, and I learned my first style of puppetry. I learned Chinese Rod Puppetry, which is a very ancient practice. And I can sit and geek out about puppetry for days because the amount of different varieties of puppetry are endless. It stops where your imagination stops. So there's so much that can be done with puppetry. So what was really great about Chinese Rod Puppetry is that it starts in the body. And I was a performer who studied dance, who studied music, who studied voice. And so I was very in tune to my body. So to learn this type of art form that is rooted in the body was really exciting for me. And it just opened up doors that I never could have imagined. So fast forward, I've now been doing puppetry for 8 years, and I've done everything from Chinese Rod Puppetry to Muppet style puppetry to small scale to huge, like 15-foot tall puppets and everything in between. And so I've been really fortunate that my path has taken me to finding an art form that is very universal and can be used for so many different types of storytelling. Encouraged by my partner today, I have some puppets to share with you guys because I recognize even in myself, I don't know when I was young if I ever realized how many puppets were out there, or when I was watching Sesame Street that I was watching a puppet. I don't think I was aware of that. And so I would love to take the veil off of puppetry and show you guys some different forms of puppets. So I have some of my favorites with me. So this little guy, he's actually, I think he's like 9 years old at this point. Oh, I have to make sure that you can see him. Oh, you'll camera off for me? Yeah. Thank you. So this is my little friend. His name is Wallace. He's a caterpillar, but he really likes drinking water. Actually, G, will you tip it up for me? Yeah, here, we'll go on your hand. So this is a Rod puppet. He's very small, you know, he's just made out of little cotton balls and some feather hot glued in between. He's got some string that's his antenna and some funky pieces of foam that are his eyes.
Make him climb.
Okay, so what's really fun about this guy is that we're able to create really good movement by doing very little. And he's very expressive because he can really look around. He can, So what I really love about him is just his ability to kind of do lots of different things. And we figured out that these are just hangers. We figured out that by bending the front hanger, can you see that? That we're able to give him a different kind of dexterity. Yeah. So this is my first little friend, Wallace. And I guess I should have talked about this before bringing out the puppets, because once you bring out a puppet, it's like you can't take the puppets away. Once they have been introduced, who cares about my face? All you want to see is the puppets, and I get it. But what I learned about puppetry, which I think is very valuable for anybody, is that you can come at it from any perspective. I've met dancers who are puppeteers. I've met musicians. One of my favorite puppeteers was a carpenter. He was in the set shop and he just loved building things. The root of all art forms, especially performance, is breath. And when it comes to puppetry, that is accentuated times 10. So we have here, ooh, a puppeteer just joined us, yay! So we have Wallace here, and what makes Wallace so exciting is not only his head movements, but when he moves on breath. So he goes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So we can tell a whole story using breaths and grunts. And I think that's what made me fall in love with puppetry, was that I needed no language. I could do everything I needed and tell an entire story using my breath, using grunts, using sound effects. This is very similar to mask making, or rather the performance of mask and clown. When somebody made that comparison to me, it also opened up a lot of doors in my mind, because clowning and mask is a silent art form where breath and movement are the primary ways that one communicates. And puppetry is very, very similar. So as you saw, even if it's only in something that is the size of a finger, you can create so much movement and you can create so much life when you give that kind of breath. So that's Wallace. I think we had a question in the chat. Well, how did I come up with the name? It's a good question. There is a wonderful puppeteer named James Godwin who has been a mentor of mine, and he talks about puppetry being a form of sacred art, that you kind of lose yourself a lot when you take on the role of a puppet. Just like when you put a clown nose on, you become that character. When I embody a puppet with breath, oftentimes I lose myself. So the answer to Maria's question of how did I come up with the name, I didn't. Wallace told me his name was Wallace. And I know that sounds really weird, but sometimes characters come to you and you don't necessarily know where or why. But I like to imagine that Wallace is Irish and he really likes drinking whiskey. And he tells me so because he crawls into my cups all the time. And that's why we've made him a drinking character, because one time when I was playing with him, he just decided to jump into my whiskey, and that's probably what also gave him his name. So I don't have a better answer than he told me what his name was. So that's a style of puppet that I really like. This is really tangible for children too, because it's so small. It's so much fun to play with. Puppets are, when we're looking at puppetry or dance or a lot of different forms, we're looking at nature as well. So I actually did study worms to understand how this guy moves, how caterpillars move, how worms move. And then once you know the rules, then you can break the rules, right? So I always like to have Wallace like jump and do weird things, because why not? So that's one form. This is an Indonesian puppet, but this is very, very similar to Chinese Rod Puppetry. This is the style of puppetry that is the basis for American Muppet style. What we have here, we have two rods that manipulate the arms, and inside we have just a single stick. This is also made out of balsa wood, which is a beautifully light wood. So this is not a heavy puppet at all. This is very, very light. So what's so beautiful about a puppet like this is we can really embody the mask element or the clown element. So, and I want to show him because his breath really makes everything work. So I'm just gonna show you, because I didn't prepare anything like a monologue or anything like that, but I just want to show you how a puppet like this can embody this space. All right, so I'm gonna have him walk around. No, please, if you could not touch on. Oh, hi, how you doing? I guess he has a question. You have a question, sir? So I don't know if you can see it. Generally, when I'm in person, I feel like you can see it better, but maybe you can see it, that he has very beautiful, delicate features that almost make him androgynous. I'm gonna be silent for a second and just show you what it would be like if I was puppeteering him on stage. So what's really beautiful about this form of puppetry is that we take almost like a Tai Chi position of our body, and we take our energy and we flow it into the puppet. So this is generally a style of puppetry that's done masked or with complete blacks so that the puppeteer really disappears. But so I'll have him, you know what, he really likes the song Michael Jackson, so let's do that. So, you know, I'm just having fun. I'm playing, I'm taking my energy and putting it into the puppet. And so this is why it's one of my favorite versions of puppetry, because it really allows the puppeteer to utilize their whole body and put it into the character. Now, we have two of these. I like to think of them as lovers. They're very dramatic. So, you know, he can walk up to his lover and then be shunned, you know, but then coyly look back, approach. Thank you, cameraman. I really appreciate that. You're doing a great job. Great job. Thank you. Thank you. So, does anybody have any questions about this style of puppet before I put him away? I know that we were going to do questions at the end, but since I'm showing you different puppets, I thought maybe I could. No? Anyone? Anyone? No? No? Cool. So,
does the
oh. Yes, Vanessa.
The rod controls the head movement and everything?
It does. This is such a beautifully simple style of puppetry. So the rod goes all the way up into the chest, and actually, terrifyingly enough, the head comes off. And so it's incredibly easy to store and travel with because you just take the puppet apart. The body stays intact. I'm so sorry, sir. The body stays intact, and you just attach the head back on. And this is such a beautiful style of simple design, because what happens is the head rod goes all the way through the body. So if by controlling the arms and by keeping the arms steady like this, I have more control over the head. If I wasn't holding the arms quite as much, then the body would go a little bit more crazy. But this is kind of just the skillfulness of this, is knowing how much tension to put into the arms. And a lot of people, especially when they first pick up a puppet, they want to do a lot with the arms. The arms are actually, most of the time, the hardest thing to master in puppetry, because gesturing is meant to be very subtle. So what I tend to do with this puppet in particular is keep a very neutral body. And so most of the gesturing is with the head and the breath. And then I keep the arm gestures much more simple. The way that if we were performing this style of puppetry on stage in its traditional form, me as the puppeteer would have a very deep lunge. And the reason why we do this, as many dancers would know, is because we're flowing our energy towards the puppet. And the puppetry style is done completely up here. So I might even be shielded by like a set piece, and the puppets are living up here. So he walks in this vein, he goes to this side, he sees something, he goes to pick it up, you know, so it's actually done much higher than my shoulder length. Cool? Awesome. What is really amazing for people who are interested in American puppetry is how a simple form like the Chinese rod puppet and the Indonesian puppet were transformed into modern day American puppetry. The idea of holding the puppet very high up was something that Jim Henson took and formed for television puppetry. So if you've ever wondered how television puppetry happens, like Sesame Street or Muppets, it's actually performed, as I just showed you, with the arm completely up. The puppets live on this plane, and what the puppeteer is doing underneath is they have a monitor. And so they can watch, so if I was doing television puppetry, I would have the puppet here, and then my eyes would be focused on a monitor. This is very difficult. This is also difficult because the monitor reverses the image. So even though if I want my puppet to look to the right, I actually make it look left because television reverses the image. So it's kind of a mind trick. It's something that has to get used to. That's why if you've ever seen audition calls, or if you've ever researched television puppetry, they might say, do you have monitor experience? And that's what they mean. Do you have experience looking at a different screen while your arm is doing something else? And so that's a little tricky, but just something good to know. I see a question from Clarissa. When rehearsing, I think that practicing with a mirror is great. I think that it is very important to be able to see what you're doing and to see what your puppet's doing. I mean, I would even encourage everybody to use their hand as a puppet and see, how do you speak as the puppet? I mean, it's just my hand, but I guarantee you, most of you are looking at my hand and not me. The reason why that happens is because I know where I'm looking, even though my hand doesn't have eyes. kind of the next step to puppetry. The first step is breath. The second is eye focus. And we can cheat eye focus because wherever the puppeteer is focusing is actually really where the audience will focus. And that's very detailed. These are a lot of like details of performance, but it's the thing that inspires me, because I think what happened for me was that puppetry became my performance art. I wasn't sure where I was going in my career, and I found this form of art that allowed me to take all of those tools from my toolbox and narrow it into a focus. So then I got really excited. I had experience building things because I was at Kids and Company. My mom was a maker. And so then I had some friends be like, would you build a puppet? Here's the truth. I have never considered myself a good artist. I'm not good at drawing. I have struggled with painting in my life. Like, if I was chosen to like design a set, that would be the scariest thing in the world to me, because I don't really have that mind. So I started building out of recycled material, primarily because I was like, if I build out of recycled material and I don't like what I make, then I haven't spent any money and I can throw it away without any without feeling bad about throwing away materials. What I learned in using recycled material is that I love using recycled material. That by limiting myself to only using recycled material, I had created a box that I could then be creative in. And so for me as an artist, I needed to create that box, and that box has been using recycled material and found objects to be inspired and then take that and make something else. So, well, let me show this one first. I did a workshop with some Boy Scouts just a couple of days ago, and I made this puppet, which I'm enamored with. Her name is Tina Turner, and she is made out of a tea box. I didn't even change anything in this tea box. I literally just added eyes. And noticed that the mouth was really a good mouth. So this is an example of what I like to do, especially with kids when introducing them to puppetry, is that something as simple as a box, if it has that innate movement, can be turned into a puppet. So, Tina Turner. Wait, what was my name? I can't remember. If anybody has any good tea puns, please.
Patty Klein.
Oh, right. Patty Klein. Yeah. So this is just an example of like how I've taken that idea of recycled material, but a much more finished version of that is a puppet that I built for one of Georgina Escobar's plays, Alebrijes. And this guy, just to give you an idea of the box that I was working in for this one. Pedro Linares was an artist from Mexico in the 30s who made Alebrijes very popular in the world. He was a paper mache artist. So I decided when building a version of Pedro Linares in puppet that I wanted to use his medium, which is paper mache. So I built this guy. Now he is painted, oh, hello, oh, oh. So he is made out of paper mache, and on his head we used moss for hair. We wanted to make him as organic as possible. He is definitely more of an intricate puppet than what might come across. What I've done here for the building of this is I have put a rod in his body, very similar to the bunraku or Indonesian puppet. It's a very similar design. His head is attached to this rod, and it moves freely within his body. So you guys can kind of see what I'm doing here. And then this was discussed with the production, but we wanted his arms to be directly manipulated. This is what I mean by direct manipulation, is that my hand is touching the puppet's hand, rather than having an arm rod on his hand. The reason why we chose that design over rods is because it actually allows him to have a greater amount of movement, and the puppeteer can then be directly connected to the puppet, which increases his aliveness. So Pedro, would you like to?
It looks pretty dead.
What?
Sorry.
The puppeteer who did Pedro here did a lot of this, which is a double hand, and it's not ideal. Ideally, I would have another. Go on the other arm, or oh yeah, here. So the other thing is that I can switch. I can do his head with my left hand, and then have my right hand be manipulated, and then have a friend who takes on the other hand for me. This has become very popular in the United States. This is a type of bunraku puppet that allows multiple puppeteers to be on one puppet. Yeah, we're talking about you. Thank you. I will say puppetry, and building puppets especially, is a lot about trial and error. I don't think I've ever built a puppet where everything has gone right. So I like to build in model form first. So I'll build a miniature of the idea that I have, just to make sure that it works before I turn it into full scale. So that's something that I like to share too, because again, we don't know if these ideas are going to work, so it's good to use materials that are easily replaced and to make little models. I will say another thing about using recycled material is, like plastic bottles, for instance, they don't biodegrade. So you are essentially making a puppet out of something that will not break, that will not disintegrate. What they found in the Muppets is that a lot of the material they had used started decomposing. So there are very expensive materials out there that will not decompose, but they're also pretty hazardous for the environment. So our cat food containers, for instance, are these really hard plastic containers. How do we take that plastic and turn it into fingers for a puppet? So again, this is just my own love and passion of using recycled material, but I will say I've worked on a lot of different puppet sets and productions, and recycled material tends to be some of the strongest material you can find. So just to throw that out there. I see a question. What do you do as puppeteer to sing together? Great question. Great question. So it will give you an example. When I did the 15-foot tall puppets, which I have a video on my website, so I'll share that with you guys at the end, and you can look at some of my past work and some of the things that I've been talking about today. We had these 15-foot tall puppets that were basically like Pedrito, but they were full size. So they had a head, a body, 2 arms, 2 legs. We needed 6 puppeteers to manipulate 1 puppet. That's a lot of people to coordinate. The way that we figured out was the best, and it wasn't just that we were coordinating, we were doing fight choreography. So we needed to make the puppet not only move in a normal way, but to kick and to punch and to do things that our bodies don't generally do. So what we had to understand is, how does that movement work in our body? So as 6 people, we all learned the choreography, and we had it down as dancers do, to an 8 count, and we learned the entire choreography within our bodies first. Then we practiced it and we learned to breathe together. That really is the thing that binds the puppet, is breathing. But you can't have everybody breathing. You need to have kind of a captain. So the person who is control of the chest is the one who controls the breath. So as an example, if I had 2 people on Pedro, or even if I had 3 people on Pedro, I'm the one controlling his chest and his head, so I'm the one controlling the breath. I'm going to communicate to my fellow puppeteer that we're going to move that direction when I do an exhale, okay? So we go, and we all move together because we knew on that exhale is when we needed to move. So everything is linked to breath. When we're doing a movement, the movement starts with the inhale and then gets put as the exhale. All right, so I want to just say one thing else before we open it up to questions. Puppetry, like so many fields of our industry, is male dominated and is white dominated. That sucks. Just to put it plainly, I haven't been able to get jobs because I'm too short. I think that's ridiculous. A woman can move in high heels and be just as tall, but especially with puppetry, a lot of the puppets have been built for tall white men. There is a big initiative to change this, of course. Every single person in our world has a different story and a different perspective to share. Having an a field in our industry being dominated by one has limited us. So there are a lot of people, especially in puppetry, who are trying to change this. There is the Puppeteers of America. They have started a branch of puppetry, like a community called Puppeteers of Color. So if you're interested in this, again, I will share my email address. Anybody can come to me. I would be happy to share my resources and point you in the direction. But the fact of the matter is, there isn't a whole lot of diversity in puppetry, except for when you go outside of the United States. Puppetry is all over the world, and I've had the good fortune to go to Israel, Poland, Bulgaria, Japan, and go to puppetry festivals to the UK, to Spain. So there is diversity in puppetry, but there isn't very much here in this country. But the international puppetry communities are thriving and growing and consistently changing. Puppetry in other countries is much more serious. I think that a lot of American puppetry is very based on comedy and geared towards children. Puppetry in other countries is a much more serious art form, like in Japan with bunraku. That's like going to the opera. So there's so many different forms of puppetry. There's so much to learn about and to see. And yeah, now I'll open up the floor for questions, and I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mindy. That was awesome. And so we open it now, and feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question, and if we can get to it. We have about 20 minutes if you all have a question.
And I'd love to talk more about the international puppetry that I've seen, if that interests anybody, because before 2 years ago, I had no idea of the different kinds of art forms that were happening with puppetry. Puppetry can literally be anything. It can be projection mapping. It can be virtual. It can be done in shadow, toy theater, and all of these styles of theaters have hundred of years of history. Like, toy theater is actually a Victorian style of puppetry. And it's making a resurgence now because we're all at home and we can all play with toys. Also, taking this camera and using it as our lens opens up puppetry even more. So if anybody has any questions about that, I have worked in virtual puppetry as well.
Wondering, how close does it become to stop motion, like with clay, and then again with having the screen, and does the puppet world kind of mix into that, or is they still kind of their own separate thing?
It kind of depends on who you ask. A lot of animators do consider themselves puppeteers, especially stop motion, because you really are creating a puppet that you move around. That is an incredibly tedious art form. I tip my hats to every animator and stop animator. It's amazing. I think that it just depends. It is the choice of the production, how much you see. If you want to show the rods, like Wallace could easily be turned into a stop motion. All I would have to do is record him as such. But it would be my choice to either leave the rods in the picture or take them away. So I think it just depends on what aesthetically the person wants to do with the puppetry. You know what I mean? Thank you. Do I have any advice for breath with hand and rod? Yes, absolutely. My advice to anybody who's interested in Muppet style puppetry is to first start in your hand and choose like your favorite song, or like I do Happy Birthday with kids all the time. And you have to take in a deep breath. Happy birthday to you. And so my advice is to over-exaggerate the breath. You know, I'm sure many of you have had acting teachers who tell you, go really far because then we can take you back. That's the same thing with breath. I mean, like obnoxiously heavy breath, like, and then play with breath. What does breath sound like when you're laughing? Like, how does your character laugh? Is it like a, or is it more like a, and how does that breathing happen in your hand? Once you have an understanding of how that feels in your hand, then you can put a puppet on and see what it looks like in that puppet. Like, one of my favorite things to do with a puppet is like really test out its mouth. So like pretend like you're at a dentist appointment and be like, ah, can you go a little wider, please? Ah, and push it as far as you can. Now, that being said, when you open a puppet's mouth, you then lose the eye focus. So you have to be a little bit more intentional once you've got this down, then you can start playing with where they're looking. And a general rule of thumb for puppets is they look and then they move. So if I want to go somewhere, I'm going to look and then I'll move. The reason why we isolate it like that is because it gives a clearer picture to the audience. This goes back to clown and mask. You want to make very clean movements. So that's why breath is very important, because you go, ah, oh. Those are 4 different movements. By isolating them, I told a story. So it's kind of taking the most simple ideas and accentuating them, because that will make your puppet come to life. If I was doing a puppetry workshop, I would say, first we do breath, then we do eye focus, and then we do listening. Because half of acting is reacting, and your puppet is an actor. So how do you listen with a puppet? I'll show you one of my favorite examples is like my puppet is now currently listening to me. They can be nodding their head. And so I'm constantly giving my puppet breath. By giving my puppet breath, I make it alive and it is then actively listening. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah, cool. Justin asked, do your puppets normally have a voice? Yes. Oh yeah. It's kind of one of those things like with Wallace. I don't always decide what the voice is. I like to let the puppet play. What does a puppet look like? And maybe they have a really short nose. I might then make that puppet sound like really nasally. And because they don't have a very long nasal passage, you know. So I like to first look at the puppet and get inspiration from whoever built that puppet, or if it's me. But when choosing voices, I encourage you to play as much as you can. And you don't have to stick with the first thing that comes. Sometimes the first thing that comes is going to be the one that you end up with. But I have a friend who works in voiceover, and he says that before he chooses anything, he does at least 3 different ones before going back. So you can do like I have Tina here, so like, hi, how you doing? That could be one voice. Hello, I'm British. That could be another voice. You know, so playing with dialects, but it's very similar to creating a character. Where does your character come from? How much education do they have? Are they old? Are they young? All of those go into what that character sounds like and how that character moves. So a lot of what puppetry is also character building, and understanding the basis of character building to then make a puppet come to life. So you don't have to make those decisions. You can bring a puppet to life just with breath and movements and that kind of thing. But once you start digging deeper, then you want to ask those kinds of questions. Where does this character come from? What makes them happy? What makes them sad? All that kind of stuff. I do have one more puppet here if you guys want to see. He's not a puppet. But I made him a puppet. So this is actually a sculpture that I was given. He's a little rabbi, a little further up, thank you. But this sculpture has what we call in the puppetry world sympathetic movement. He moves by himself. So I started playing with him. Do you see how when I'm moving his feet, his upper body moves? Can you see that? That's what I mean by sympathetic movement. And it is very indicative of what his character is like. So he's got very bow legs, so hello. I would like to tell you a story. Excuse me, Rabbi, you're currently on my mouse. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, my back. So this is just an example of how I like to encourage everybody to play with everything around you, because he was not made to be a puppet, but he clearly is a puppet given just a little bit of life. Yeah. Does anybody have any more questions or yes, Constanza?
So how do you kind of enter, like, let's say you're designing a new puppet, or you're kind of like, you're redesigning a new puppet. How do you like attack it, whether like it's the actor that kind of creates the character and you kind of design off what the actor's going off, or is it the other way around where you design it and the actor has to like, or puppeteer has to work off you?
I like to, something I really find inspiring is to go to the character and see what are some of its character traits. Like, if a character is very flighty, they don't really ever decide on something, or they're very air-like, then I might choose a material that's more fabric oriented, because that material may show some of their characteristics. If a character is very rigid, I might choose to do less movement in that character because or in that puppet, because the character is very rigid. So to answer your question, I like to first start with what's given to me on the page. And if nothing is given to you on the page, if you're creating a puppet character, then you can, maybe you're inspired by a material. That's actually generally where I start. I'm inspired by this tea box. So what kind of character am I going to make out of a tea box? Or I have a lot of paper that has this really beautiful flowy quality. I'm going to make a princess because she's very flighty and flowy. Maybe that was a little sexist that I chose princess, but it was just the first thing that came to my mind. But also, in that respect, I, as a puppet builder, because I'm generally the puppet performer, I like to make sure that I'm choosing lightweight materials, because making a puppet heavy is a very difficult thing to then manipulate. And I like to take the path of least resistance. I don't do a whole lot of mechanics in my puppets. That's why Pedro is I put my hand directly on him, because I like, and this is just my own preference, is that as a performer, oh, thank you, Pedro. As a performer, I like to be as close to the puppet as possible. So that's why I choose things like this, because if I had a rod attached, it might break. But without having a rod attached and it being the performer, I've made the choice that I am directly connected. And there's a lot of decisions that go in that, and I feel like, especially when you're doing puppets in a production, there's a lot more conversation than people generally think. The materials is a question, who's going to perform it, how many people you want to perform it. These are all questions that go and are involved in the puppet making process. I hope I answered your question. Okay. Have I ever made a voice, then a puppet to match? I haven't yet, but I did have an experience one time where I went into a theater company and they had this puppet that was like rejected. Like nobody could bring this puppet to life. He was just a really funky looking guy. If you can imagine like a red, like Cookie Monster, but red. He was just like not very appealing, and nobody could bring him to life. I was given this puppet kind of as an initiation to the theater company, and I put the puppet on, and it was one of those things where it just took over, and the voice that came out of me was unlike anything I had ever made in my life. I don't know where it came from, but the puppet really dictated that to me. He kind of sounds like a grouch. The voice is, oh, I'm so excited to be here. And so I made the puppet very nervous because he'd been rejected by all of the other people. So what came out of that was a really great discovery. I do like to play with voices a lot. I've gotten into voice acting, so I started just playing with, I started playing with just voices. And again, just like playing with inanimate objects like this, I would encourage anybody who's interested to just play with their voice.
Where does a character live when it's right in your nose? What kind of character is that? And are they really whiny, or are they actually really like, no, I'm gonna sink lower into my voice, and
maybe this character is a little slower. Pacing, breath, these are all really fun things to play with. my partner wants me to say that that puppet that was rejected actually ended up being one of my favorite puppets I've ever performed. And I got to play Lavinia in Titus Andronicus with this puppet. And that experience got me my first New York Times review. And in the New York Times, the reviewer said, it's amazing what gasps and breath can do. So if you get nothing out of this talk, I hope that you get that those can make a character. And especially when it's in a puppet, it breathes even more, and staying alive is kind of the main thing. I see one more. When creating a new puppet, is there a question you feel is essential? What I think is essential when creating a puppet character is asking yourself, why a puppet? Can this character do everything that it wants to do in a human body? Or does it need to be a puppet because puppets can do what humans can't? So before you choose to do puppetry, please ask yourself and your collaborators, why are we using a puppet? Why is it necessary to use this art form and not another art form? Because the fact of the matter is, if you don't know the answer to that question, then I would actually probably tell you, don't use a puppet. There has to be a burning need to use the puppet as the storyteller. Like with Pedrito, this character is supposed to be half alive, half dead. A human can't fly or dive underwater and then come up or ride on the back of a whale, but a puppet can. So what is it that your character needs to do that a human can't do? And then choosing, if you decide, yes, it has to be a puppet because it needs to travel through space or breathe underwater or do gymnastics or, whatever it may be. A human can't do that, a puppet can. So I always encourage everyone to ask themselves that question. Why are we using the puppet? Because that should be the first conversation before ever creating anything. Yeah.
Excellent. Oh, thank you so much, Mindy. Before we conclude, I want to make sure that you're able to put the information, your website, any contact information that you want to provide in the chat, because I know we have a lot of interested people, in this space. Thank you. And so as Mindy is putting that in, I want to thank everyone for joining us. We are going to put this on our website. You'll see a tab that says CoLART Dean's Series. We also have some more speakers coming up. We have several in September. Our next one will be September 2nd with Ann Garcia Romero from Notre Dame, and that'll be a playwriting workshop. And the instructions are there because that one is going to require you to do something. And so you got to wear the proper clothes and all that good stuff. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Mindy. This was wonderful and inspiring, and it was just so much fun. So many things that I hadn't thought about. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and we're so glad that we can still connect and talk about, what it is that we do or what we're trying to do, even though we're separated from each other right now.
Yes, thank you all so much for giving me your time, and please do reach out to me. This is a much larger subject, and I would love to answer more questions if you all have them.
Thank you so much, everyone. Stay well, stay safe, and we hope to see you at our next session.
Thank you.
Bye.